NASCAR has buried two champions in the span of a single month. Kyle Busch, dead at 41, a career cut violently short. Ned Jarrett, gone at 93. A life lived so completely it almost doesn't seem real. One man never got to finish his story. The other wrote every single chapter himself. On the track, in the booth, and at home as a father. Two-time Cup champion, Hall of Famer. The conscience of NASCAR broadcasting for 3 decades. Gentleman Ned Jarrett is gone. But to understand what NASCAR lost on June 4, 2026, you have to go back to the beginning. Because the story of Ned Jarrett doesn't start with championships or broadcast booths. It starts on a farm in North Carolina with a young man who had never planned on becoming a racing legend. Ned Jarrett was born on October 12, 1932, near Newton, North Carolina. He grew up working on his family's farm and sawmill, a life built on physical labor and rural discipline, with no obvious path toward professional motorsport. That began to change when word spread through the community about a new racetrack being built, nearby Hickory Speedway. When the Speedway held its very first Premier Series event in 1953, Ned Jarrett was in it. I played a little basketball and baseball in high school and thought I had some athletic ability. When they opened the Speedway, I ran the first race they ever run there. I was hooked. But getting hooked and getting competitive are two entirely different things. Racing in the early 1950s was not a profession anyone could simply walk into. Cars were expensive. Sponsorships barely existed. Prize money was modest at best. Jarrett's entry into serious competition came through a poker game. He won half interest in his first race car. That way, it was unconventional, but it was a start. The real turning point came in 1959. Jarrett had been competing in the Sportsman Series and wanted to move up to the premier level. No car owners came calling, so he decided to act on his own, with almost nothing in his pocket and a plan that most rational people would have dismissed as reckless. There was a 1957 Ford for sale in his hometown, the same car that Junior Johnson had been winning races in before his team switched to a new Dodge. The owners wanted $2,000. Jarrett didn't have $2,000, but he had a plan. There was a 100-mile race, pays $950 to win Friday night at Myrtle Beach, Jarrett later recalled. There was another race on Sunday afternoon in Charlotte that pays $950 to win. That's $900. I can cover that check on Monday morning. You can't be foolish enough to try that. But I did. I had no doubt in my mind. I was cocky enough to believe if Junior Johnson could win races in that car, I could too. He wrote the check after the bank closed on a Friday, knowing it wouldn't clear until Monday. Then he went racing. He won at Ramby Raceway in Myrtle Beach on August 1st. He won again at Southern States Fairgrounds in Charlotte on August 2nd. He covered the check Monday morning. Back-to-back victories, a legitimate car, and a career in the NASCAR Premier Series, all built on a gamble that had absolutely no margin for error. That's what's launched me into the Grand National Series, he said. What followed was one of the most statistically dominant driving careers in NASCAR history. Over 13 years, from 1953 through 1966, Ned Jarrett made 352 starts, won 50 races, recorded 185 top 5 finishes, and crossed the line inside the top 10 239 times. He became just the 3rd driver in NASCAR history to reach 50 wins. Before his Cup career took full flight, Jarrett claimed back-to-back championships in the NASCAR Sportsman Division in 1957 and 1958, establishing himself as one of the most consistent performers in the sport at any level. His first Cup Series championship came in 1961, driving a Chevrolet for car owner W.G. Holloway Jr., and the way he won it tells you everything about who Ned Jarrett was as a driver. He won just one race that entire season, but he finished in the top 5 in 23 of his 46 starts and outpointed Rex White for the title. Consistency was not just his strategy, it was his weapon. 1964 proved both his brilliance and his heartbreak. Jarrett won a career-best 15 races that season, an extraordinary number by any standard, but finished second in the championship. Stinks too? Richard Petty. 15 wins and still no title. It is one of the most remarkable runner-up seasons in the sport's history. Then came 1965. And this is where the Ned Jarrett story becomes something else entirely. Jarrett won 13 races across 54 starts that season and captured his second Cup Series championship. He finished in the top 5 in 42 of those 54 races. Those numbers alone would make it a legendary season. But there is a detail that makes it almost unbelievable. Midway through that championship year, at Greenville-Pickens Speedway in South Carolina, Ned Jarrett broke his back in a crash. He kept racing, he kept winning, he won the championship. With the help of a lot of good doctors and a lot of people, we were able to keep going and finish out the season and went on to win the championship. Jarrett said during his NASCAR Hall of Fame acceptance speech in 2011, I'm very grateful for that. The defining race of that 1965 season, and perhaps of his entire career, came at Darlington Raceway in the Southern 500. Ned Jarrett did not just win that race, he won it by 14 laps. 14 laps. That margin of victory remains the largest in the history of the NASCAR Cup Series, and it still stands today, more than 6 decades later. No one has come close. At the end of the 1966 season, Ned Jarrett walked away from driving. He was 34 years old, the reigning series champion, and he chose to retire. Ford Motor Company had temporarily withdrawn from stock car racing, and the broken back from the previous season had taken its toll. But what makes his retirement historically unique is this. He is the only Cup Series champion in NASCAR history to voluntarily retire the following year as the defending champion. He finished third in his final career start at Rockingham, then stepped away entirely, on his own terms, at the peak of his career. Retirement from the cockpit, however, did not mean retirement from NASCAR, not even close. In 1978, Ned Jarrett returned to the sport as a pit road reporter for the Motor Racing Network, known as MRN Radio. He had already launched Ned Jarrett's World of Racing, a daily radio news show that had become a fixture in the NASCAR community throughout the 1960s and 70s. But his move into the broadcast booth at CBS and later ESPN transformed him from a former champion into something arguably more influential, the voice that brought NASCAR into millions of American living rooms every Sunday. He was the first former driver to successfully transition into a full-time television analyst role, and he set the template that every driver-turned-broadcaster who followed him has tried to match. His knowledge of the sport was unrivaled, and more importantly, he had the rare ability to translate complex racing concepts into language that a first-time viewer could immediately understand. One of his signature segments involved driving around a superspeedway at the posted speed limit, 55 or 65 miles per hour, and then being passed by a race car traveling at 200 miles per hour. No graphics package, no special effects, just the contrast. It was one of the most effective demonstrations of racing speed ever put on television, and he first did it in the 1980s. Decades later, with every technological advancement the sport has made, nothing has replicated its impact. When NASCAR introduced complicated new pit road procedures at the 1991 Daytona 500, it was Ned Jarrett that CBS turned to in order to explain them to the public. When the restrictor plate needed explaining to a national audience, Ned Jarrett did it. He had the technical knowledge of a crew chief and the communication skills of a natural broadcaster, a combination that almost never exists in the same person. Then came February 14, 1993, the Daytona 500. Ned Jarrett was in the CBS broadcast booth when the final lap unfolded, and his son, Dale Jarrett, was locked in a battle with 5-time series champion Dale Earnhardt for the win. What happened next was not planned. It was not a broadcast strategy. It was a father on live national television unable to contain himself. "Come on, Dale, go baby go. Don't let him get to the inside of you coming around this turn. Here he comes, Earnhardt." It's the Dale and Dale show as they come off of turn 4. "You know who I'm pulling for, it's Dale Jarrett. Bring her to the inside, Dale, don't let him get down there. He's gonna make it. Dale Jarrett's gonna win the Daytona 500. All right." That call remains one of the most replayed moments in the history of NASCAR broadcasting. It worked not just because of its emotion, but because it was technically accurate. Ned Jarrett blended the pure joy of a father watching his son win with precise race calling that gave viewers every piece of information they needed. 3 years later, in 1996, Dale Jarrett won the Daytona 500 again, and once more, it was his father's voice calling him to the finish line. Dale Jarrett went on to win the NASCAR Cup Series championship in 1999, making the Jarretts only the second father and son combination in NASCAR history to each win the Premier Series title, joining Lee and Richard Petty. That group has since expanded to include Bill and Chase Elliott, but the Jarretts were the ones who proved it was possible. Ned Jarrett was inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame in 2011 as part of the second class of inductees. Dale Jarrett followed him in 2014. They are one of only 5 families in NASCAR history, with both a father and son enshrined in the Hall of Fame for their careers as drivers. When news of Ned Jarrett's passing broke on June 5, 2026, tributes arrived immediately from across the sport. Richard Petty, who competed directly against Jarrett for nearly a decade, issued a formal statement through the Petty family. "Ned was one of the true gentlemen of our sport and a fierce competitor whose talent, integrity, and dedication helped shape NASCAR into what it is today. Our family shared many years of competition, friendship, and mutual respect with Ned and his family." NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell honored Jarrett with a statement that captured both dimensions of his career. Despite his calm demeanor, Gentleman Ned Jarrett was as fierce a competitor as NASCAR has ever seen. His on-track accomplishments speak for themselves with wins and championship across several NASCAR divisions. But it was his off-the-track persona that separated Ned from his peers. He was as kind as his nickname indicated, and his endearing personality helped him excel in his second career as a broadcaster. Ned was an outstanding ambassador for the sport for more than 6 decades, and he will be dearly missed. The Jarrett family confirmed that Ned died peacefully on Thursday, June 4, 2026, of natural causes, at his home in Newton, North Carolina, with his family by his side. He was 93 years old, the oldest living NASCAR Cup Series champion at the time of his passing. His wife, Martha, to whom he had been married for 67 years, had preceded him in death on February 5, 2023. Our father was a devout Christian and a devoted, loving family man, the family said in their statement. He was a friend to everyone he met and NASCAR's oldest living champion. By all accounts, he was a true NASCAR legend. While we mourn his passing, we celebrate the remarkable life of an amazing man and truly the best father anyone could have wished for. Rest in peace, Dad. Go back to that broadcast booth in 1993, a father calling his son home at Daytona. That moment was not an accident. It was not a departure from who Ned Jarrett was. It was exactly who he had always been, a man who competed with everything he had, communicated with rare clarity and honesty, and never once lost sight of what actually mattered. He won 50 races, he won 2 championships. He broke his back and came back and won the title anyway. He retired at 34 on his own terms. He went into broadcasting and became the gold standard. He called his son to one of the most famous victories in Daytona 500 history. He lived to 93, surrounded by family, in the same state where he ran his very first race. Gentleman Ned was not just a nickname, it was a description. And in a sport that has lost 2 of its champions in a matter of weeks, it is worth remembering that some careers, some lives, are so complete, so full that the only appropriate response is not grief alone, but recognition of something remarkable. Ned Jarrett was remarkable, and NASCAR will not see another one like him. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Tell us your favorite Ned Jarrett memory, whether it was from behind the wheel or behind the microphone.